You remember the exact screeching sound of a dial-up modem connecting to the internet, that strange mechanical noise that meant you were about to enter a completely different world. You remember walking through the aisles of a video rental store on a Friday night, carefully choosing a movie, knowing that once you picked it, that was it. No endless scrolling, no second chances, just one choice and the patience to sit with it. You remember waiting for your favourite song to come on the radio, finger hovering over the record button, hoping you wouldn't miss the beginning. There was a rhythm to life back then, slower, quieter, more grounded, and yet, today you instinctively understand the logic of algorithms. You know how to navigate TikTok, how to read trends, how to adapt to a digital world that moves faster than anyone can fully process. You can switch between apps, conversations, and identities without even thinking about it. And that's where something feels off. Because when you're around millennials, you're still the younger one, the one who grew up with more technology, the one who doesn't quite share their milestones. But when you're around Gen Z, something shifts. Suddenly you feel older, slightly out of sync, like the energy, the humour, even the pace of conversation is just a little too fast, a little too foreign. So where does that leave you? You're not a millennial. You're not Gen Z. You exist in the space between them, a narrow window of time that most people don't even notice, but you feel every single day. You weren't born at the wrong time. You were born at the turning point. And that might be the most confusing and most important place to be. To understand why your mind feels like it's constantly switching gears, you have to go back to a very specific moment in time, the moment everything changed. The human brain doesn't just develop randomly. The prefrontal cortex, the part responsible for decision-making, identity, and social awareness, goes through its most critical wiring during childhood and adolescence. And for most generations, that wiring happens in a relatively stable environment. Millennials grew up in a world that was mostly analog. Technology arrived slowly, giving their brains time to adapt step by step. Gen Z, on the other hand, was born into a fully digital environment. Their brains never had to adjust. They were built for it from the start. But you didn't get that stability. Your childhood was simple, physical, and grounded in the real world. You knocked on doors to see if your friends were home. You got bored, and that boredom forced your brain to imagine, to create, to wait. Your sense of reality was slow, linear, and predictable. Then, almost overnight, everything accelerated. High-speed internet, smartphones, social media, constant connectivity. And it didn't happen when you were fully formed. It happened right in the middle of your identity development, when your brain was still trying to figure out who you were. This is what psychologists would call a form of transition shock. Not a single event, but a rapid environmental shift that your brain wasn't fully prepared for. One moment, life had clear boundaries. The next, everything became instant, infinite, and always available. And even if you adapted on the surface, something deeper had already been set. Because part of your brain still expects the world to be slow, while the rest of your life keeps speeding up. So what actually happens when your brain is shaped by two completely different realities? It doesn't just adapt, it divides. Part of you was built in a slower world, a world where time had weight, where attention stayed in one place, where progress felt linear. That part of your mind still seeks depth. It wants meaning, stability, and a sense that things are moving in a clear direction. But layered on top of that is something newer, a faster system. One trained in speed, novelty, and constant input. It processes information in fragments. It jumps between thoughts, tabs, and stimuli without hesitation. It's flexible, reactive, and always anticipating what comes next. You're not choosing between these two systems. You're running both at the same time. This is cognitive duality, and the tension it creates is subtle, but constant. You sit down to focus on something important, and within minutes, your attention starts to drift. Not because you lack discipline, but because part of your brain has been conditioned to expect interruption. You want to build something meaningful over time, but you also feel an underlying pressure to move faster, to pivot, to not fall behind. You crave stillness, yet feel uneasy when things are too quiet. This isn't inconsistency, it's conflict. Your brain remembers how to operate in a world that rewarded patience, but your current environment rewards speed, visibility, and constant engagement. So you exist in between, pulled in two directions at once, trying to think deeply in a system designed to keep you distracted. And over time, that tension doesn't just affect how you work, it begins to shape how you see yourself. When your mind is constantly shifting between two systems, your identity doesn't stay fixed either. Because identity isn't just who you are internally, it's shaped by reflection, by the people around you who mirror your behavior, your values, your way of thinking. Over time, those reflections help you build a stable sense of self. But what happens when the mirrors keep changing? As a zillennial, you learn to adjust almost automatically. In a professional environment, you lean into structure. You communicate clearly, you understand expectations, you present yourself in a way that feels grounded and composed. You operate in a way that aligns with older generations, measured, reliable, intentional. Then you step into the digital world. Your tone shifts. Your humor becomes quicker, more layered, sometimes more ironic. You understand references, trends, the subtle cues of online culture. You move faster, speak differently, react differently. You don't consciously decide to switch. It just happens. This is a form of code switching, not across cultures, but across generations. And while it makes you highly adaptable, it comes with a cost. Because over time, a quiet question starts to surface. Which version of me is actually real? There are moments when you feel slightly out of sync in both spaces, too structured for one, too fluid for the other. You can fit into either world, but you don't fully settle in either one. It creates a subtle form of identity fragmentation. Not because you lack a sense of self, but because your sense of self has been stretched across multiple contexts, constantly adjusting to match the room you're in. And when everything gets quiet, you're left trying to piece it back together. If identity is built through belonging, then what happens when you never fully belong anywhere? This is where the zillennial experience becomes quietly heavy. With millennials, there's always a subtle distance. They're further along in life. Careers feel more established, responsibilities more defined. You can relate to their mindset, but not completely to their reality. There's a sense that you're still on your way, not quite there yet. But with Gen Z, the distance feels different. It's not about life stage, it's about rhythm. The way they communicate is faster, more layered, more abstract. Humor shifts quickly, trends evolve overnight, and conversations move at a pace that feels slightly out of sync with how you process things. You can follow it, but it doesn't feel native. So you do what you've learnt to do best. You adapt, you adjust your tone, your references, your energy, depending on who you're around. You find ways to fit in just enough to belong in the moment. And most of the time it works, but underneath that adaptability is something harder to ignore. A quiet, persistent feeling of being slightly out of place in every room you enter. This is social limbo. No one is rejecting you. You're included in conversations, in groups, in spaces. But there's a difference between being included and being fully understood. You're present, but not deeply rooted. Connected, but not completely mirrored. And over time, that creates a subtle kind of loneliness. Not the obvious kind that comes from isolation, but the quieter kind that comes from never quite feeling at home, no matter where you are. Your relationship with technology isn't simple. It never was. On the surface, you're highly capable. You know how to navigate platforms, edit content, adapt to new tools almost instantly. You're fluent in the digital world in a way older generations often struggle to understand. But beneath that fluency, there's tension, because your brain remembers something most people don't anymore: silence. You remember what it felt like to be unreachable, to leave the house without a device tracking your location, to sit in a moment without feeling the need to document it, share it, or turn it into something consumable. And that memory matters, because now you live in a completely different environment. You scroll without thinking. You open apps out of habit, not intention. You check notifications even when you already know there's nothing important waiting. Hours pass in fragments, short videos, endless feeds, constant updates, and when you stop, you can't quite remember what you just consumed. This isn't just usage, it's conditioning. Your brain has been trained to expect stimulation at all times, and when it doesn't get it, something feels wrong, restless, uncomfortable, but at the same time, you're aware of it. You know the exhaustion that follows hours of scrolling. You feel the subtle drop in your mood after comparing your life to curated versions of others. You recognize the way your attention has been pulled apart into smaller and smaller pieces, and yet you stay. Because this isn't just entertainment anymore. It's how you connect, how you work, how you exist. You're not just using technology, you're trying to live inside it, while part of you is still longing for a way out. There's a specific kind of anxiety that doesn't come from what you're doing, but from when you feel like you're doing it. It's not loud. It doesn't always look like panic, but it sits in the background, quietly asking one question: am I already too late? As a zillennial, your timeline never feels stable. When you look at millennials, it feels like you're behind. They're buying homes, building long-term careers, starting families. There's a sense of structure, of progression, of milestones that seem just out of reach. But when you look at Gen Z, the feeling flips. They're faster, more in tune with trends, more comfortable in a world that seems to be accelerating every year. And suddenly, you don't feel behind in life. You feel behind in culture. So where does that leave you? Somewhere in between. Too early for one path, too late for another. This creates what we can call time anxiety, a constant awareness of time passing, without a clear sense of where you're supposed to be within it. You might feel pressure to catch up, even when you're not sure what you're catching up to, or a sense that you need to move faster, even when you don't know which direction matters most. And the more you compare yourself across both generations, the heavier it becomes. Because you're not measuring yourself against one standard. You're measuring yourself against two completely different timelines, and neither one fully fits. So you end up feeling out of sync, not just with others, but with life itself, like you're moving, but never quite at the right speed. There's another layer to this feeling of being out of sync, and it's not just psychological, it's structural. Because while you were trying to figure out who you are, the world you were stepping into was becoming increasingly unstable. You entered adulthood during a time of rising costs, unpredictable job markets, and a growing shift toward freelance work, short-term contracts, and the gig economy. The traditional path, study, get a stable job, build a steady life, no longer feels as clear or as accessible as it once did. And even if you follow it, it doesn't always guarantee the same results. So you hesitate. Not because you're lazy, not because you lack direction, but because the system itself feels uncertain. This leads to something often called delayed adulthood. You don't fully settle down as early as previous generations. You take longer to commit to careers, to relationships, to long-term decisions. But at the same time, you don't completely reject adulthood either. You still want stability, you still want something solid to build on. You're caught in between commitment and caution. Part of you wants to lock in a path, to feel secure, to move forward with clarity. But another part of you keeps asking, what if this isn't the right one? So you keep options open, you explore, you pivot, and while that flexibility can be a strength, it also creates a lingering sense of instability. Because without clear milestones, it's harder to feel like you're progressing. You're moving, but not always arriving. Growing, but without the reassurance that you're doing it right. And over time, that uncertainty doesn't just affect your choices, it begins to shape how you see your future. So how do you cope with a world that feels too fast, too uncertain, too fragmented? You look backward, not because you're stuck in the past, but because the past feels stable in a way the present doesn't. For many Zillennials, nostalgia isn't just a preference, it's a psychological refuge. Early 2000s memories, old games, TV shows, simple routines carry a sense of clarity. Life felt more contained, more predictable, more real. There were fewer choices, but somehow more certainty. And when the present feels overwhelming, your mind returns to that version of reality. Not to escape, but to regulate. To remind itself what calm used to feel like. But this doesn't just stay in memory. It shows up in how you connect with people. You live in a time where connection is technically easier than ever. You can meet someone instantly, message anyone at any time, stay in constant contact without ever being physically present. And yet, something feels missing. Dating apps offer endless options, but that abundance creates hesitation. Conversations start quickly, but they disappear just as fast. You find yourself analysing messages, second-guessing intentions, wondering if there's always someone better just one swipe away. You have access to more people than any generation before you, but fewer connections that feel grounded and real. So you become selective, not because you don't want connection, but because you want the right kind of connection. Something slower, more intentional, something that isn't built on performance or convenience. And in that process, something else develops. A deeper awareness of emotion, a sensitivity to authenticity, an ability to read between the lines. You understand what it means to feel disconnected, even in a hyper-connected world. And because of that, you don't just look for connection. You look for something that actually feels real. After everything, the confusion, the pressure, the constant feeling of being out of sync, it's easy to believe that something went wrong, that you were born at the wrong time, that you don't quite fit because you're missing something everyone else seems to have. But what if that's not true? What if the very thing that makes you feel out of place is actually the reason you're so valuable? Because when you step back and look at it clearly, you start to see a pattern. You understand the structure, discipline, and depth of a slower world. But you also understand the speed, adaptability, and complexity of the digital one. You don't fully belong to either, which means you can move between both. This is your hidden advantage. You are the bridge. You can translate ideas across generations. You can connect people who struggle to understand each other. You can recognize when the world is moving too fast and when it's not moving fast enough. Your adaptability isn't confusion. Your awareness isn't weakness. It's range. And in a world that is constantly changing, range is survival. Maybe the reason you never felt like you belonged in just one place is because you were never meant to stay there. You were meant to see the full picture, to carry the memory of what felt real, and the ability to navigate what comes next. So if this video felt like it was describing your life, like someone finally put words to something you've always felt but never fully understood, then you're not alone. There are more people like you than you think. Leave a comment below and share the most zillennial thing you experience every day. And if you want more deep dives into the psychology of how we think, feel, and navigate this world, don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell. This space is for people who live between worlds. Thank you for watching.